something which I believe is really important for people to know. Certainly, as we talk about things, we talk about 21st century as the pinnacle of human revolution, of human evolution, and we say that humanity has not achieved as much they have now. And that's why sometimes when we go back and look at our forefathers, our ancestors, those ancestors in terms of those who rendered their services to Deen, to Islam, it is absolutely amazing how much they achieved. And of course, one of those personalities is Sayyidi Ala Hazrat Imam Ahmed Sunnah, alayhi rahmah. And as I was preparing for this, I was surprised at so many different aspects of his services, not just Islamic studies, but even in terms of his scientific knowledge and the encyclopedia he produced in the form of Fatawa Razawiya Sharif. The beauty of that is that it is amongst those answers he has given to various questions which came from all around the world. Amongst those questions, he has really shed some jewels of science which was way more modern than we would have expected for somebody of his stature who was known mainly for his religious activities. Al-Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is a physicist. So I was surprised that he, at that time, when there were no computers, there was no IT system, with very little in terms of infrastructure, he was able to give mathematic formulae to calculate the sunrise and the sunset times, to calculate what is the Shari'i definition of traveling, of journey. How do you convert all those units? So as viewers would know that from imperial system, we moved to SI, so the system international. And Ala Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala was able to move all those books written over nearly 1300 years and translate those units into modern science, the modern by his definition. And then Ala Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala as an astrologist, as a chemist, the discussions he had about the diameter of Earth, the radius of Earth, how one would go about looking at elements, the periodic table, then the science of logarithms, algebra. He has written 8 books on logarithm, 4 on algebra. You look at astrology, 22 books he has written just on the subject of astrology. Mathematics, 31 books he has written just on mathematics. And that includes geometry, that includes arithmetic. So whichever field of science you look at, he has actually books written on that. So this is not someone who has gone to a university. He hasn't done a PhD. He hasn't done an MPhil. He's not one of those of a standard, what I would call, from professional fields who have excelled in their studies, who have been to big universities which are renowned all over the world. They have achieved, PhD, double PhDs, all of that. This is someone who has been homeschooled by his own father, who has been to ulama-i kiram. And as we'll touch later, that was always in his intention. Because whatever he saw it through the glasses of Deen. So when someone is that committed to a cause, and the cause of the Holy Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, then Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala opens doors for them. So I was reading that until a few years ago, overall around the world, in 4 continents, 9 countries, 28 universities have produced PhDs on Ala Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala. So these are people who are actually doing a deep dive into Ala Hazrat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala's services to science, to Islam, to humanities, to various subjects. And they are getting PhDs on his work and just trying to explain that work and bring it to the knowledge of this century. And that includes very famous universities, so Columbia University of States, Banaras University of India, Jamiatul Azhar in Egypt, Punjab University in Pakistan. All around the world, they are producing PhDs. So this is just 28 PhDs, and that was several years ago. And if we look at MPhils and masters which have been done, with the research thesis, the subject being the services of Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, that even goes beyond that. And that's the reason why his famous Salatu Salam, when that goes to Jamiatul Azhar, they translate it into Arabic and say Al-Manzumat al-Salamiyya fi madhi khair al-bariyya.
Subhanallah.
So they are so impressed that this is someone whose first language is not Arabic.
Allah.
And still, they were so impressed his, the words he selected. So that's what he's doing for Deen. And these are people who are producing PhD scholars and all of that. And they thought there is something in him. There was a very famous professor, a PhD holder, and actually knighted by the empire. And that person, when he comes, and he was a famous mathematician, having been trained in Germany and the UK, and he goes to Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala. But one of the things he said, just I think underlines exactly what you said. He said that he looked at Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala's works in maths and says that if people had recognized what Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is hiding in his own home, he would not have achieved anything less than a Nobel Prize.
Allahu Akbar. And this is a PhD holder person saying.
Exactly. And he was the famous mathematician, the famous professor of mathematics at that time in
the subcontinent.
And for him to say such great words, and this is someone who went to Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala not knowing or thinking about that what he would be able to he would be able to answer or help him. I guess one of the key things I guess when I'm teaching medical students or I get people who come and do internships or whatever, so sometimes you ask a very basic question. So if I were to ask my viewers a basic question about what is science, and it's incredible how many people would find it difficult to answer that question. How do you define science? What are the boundaries of science? What is in and what is out? All of that. And Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala, the beauty of his work is that he blends the boundaries of science with Islam so beautifully that at one point you think this is an Islamic scholar speaking. But the next moment think, no, this is a scientist speaking. Because he has this incredible quality of blending these two things together. And that goes straight, I would say, in the face of those who would say, oh, the religion and science are not compatible. They are mutually exclusive. So for those people, I guess it is, Allah Rahmatullahi Ta'ala work is a challenge. He shows that they actually are compatible. They can work together. And if you look at from that aspect, Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is way ahead of even the scientists of his time, because it was not so long ago what we here call dark ages of Europe, where religion and science were considered incompatible. And there are, I'm sure the students of history of science would know, if you look at all of our big universities, we know from the history that there was a time when there was a strict divide between science and religion. They were against each other. But when similarly, there was a very famous professor who was then a principal in Islamia College, Lahore, at that time, Professor Hakim Ali Khan. He writes to Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala about science. He was a great believer in Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala. So he once wrote to him a letter and said about this conflict of, can religion work with science? Can these two things work together? And the answer which Sayyidi Alat Rahmatullahi Ta'ala gave, that I guess just crystallizes the clarity of mind, the clarity of his thought. He said, so he first praised him for asking that question, and that shows his humility. And then he goes on to say that as long as science embraces Islam, there is no problem. But the moment you would try to force Islam to embrace science, then you will run into trouble. So remember to see everything in the context of Deen. So if it is supported by Islamic evidence, Brilliant. As long as there's not something against that. Because we know, alhamdulillah, that's our belief, that what Islam teaches us, those are facts.
Alhamdulillah.
And what science does, and that's where we go back to the basic definition of science. Science is a knowledge of experiments. And those experiments sometimes would give you a right answer and sometimes would give you a wrong answer. So in medical science, for example, in my field, I could enumerate several examples where a drug which we thought was very successful for a condition 20 years ago, and now we think, no, that's potentially disastrous for that patient because the science changed, the evidence changed. Science moves with that. But the beauty of the words of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala revealed through the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Ta'ala Alaihi Wasallam is that they are until the Day of Judgment.
SubhanAllah.
So what an Islamic scholar needs to do is to bring these together, blend them in, but remember that there are facts, and as long as those facts are not tried to be distorted, then science certainly works with that. And that's the beauty of Allah Hazrat Rahmatullah. Lots of Orientalists, so these mustashriqeen, the Western scholars who work on Eastern either studies or personalities, a lot of them have said that Sayyidi Allah Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is the neglected genius of the East.
Allah.
But Alhamdulillah, thanks to Dawat Islami, that he is no more neglected.
SubhanAllah.
Sayyidi Allah Rahmatullahi Ta'ala is now recognized all around the world. And of course, Dawat Islami services, they're all part of that.